Learning English seemed like a challenge at first. I thought it would be difficult to understand the grammar and pronunciation. But soon, I realized that with the right approach, everything was easier. I started by listening to simple English phrases every day. I repeated them, paying close attention to the sounds. Gradually, I began to recognize words and understand their meanings. One thing that helped me a lot was learning through context. I would watch movies and shows in English with subtitles. It wasn't just about memorizing words. It was about seeing how they were used in different situations. Slowly, I started to think in English instead of translating everything from my native language. The more I practiced, the easier it became. I made a goal to learn at least 10 new words every day. At first, it felt overwhelming, but I found that writing them down helped me remember. I created flashcards, and whenever I had free time, I would review them. This small habit made a huge difference over time. I could feel my vocabulary expanding day by day. Speaking was another hurdle, but I didn't give up. I started by talking to myself in English, even if it felt strange. Then, I found language exchange partners online. We would practice speaking, and even if I made mistakes, they would correct me gently. This was crucial for building confidence. I began to speak with more fluency and less fear. By the end of the month, I could hold simple conversations. It was clear that learning English wasn't as hard as I had initially thought. With consistent practice and the right tools, I was able to make progress quickly. I realized that the key to learning English is not perfection, but persistence. Chapter 2: Practice Makes Perfect. After a few weeks of consistent practice, I saw even more improvement. I learned that making mistakes is part of the process. I stopped worrying about getting everything right. Instead, I focused on communicating effectively. The more I spoke, the more natural it became. It didn't matter if I wasn't perfect. What mattered was that I kept trying. To improve my pronunciation, I began listening to podcasts and repeating the sentences I heard. I paid attention to how the speakers stress certain words and phrases. It wasn't easy at first, but over time, my accent started to sound more natural. I also practiced speaking with native speakers to fine-tune my pronunciation. One of the best things I did was immerse myself in the language. I changed the settings on my phone and computer to English. I read news articles, books, and even social media posts in English. The more I exposed myself to the language, the more I absorbed. It became part of my daily life, and that made a big difference. Writing also played a huge role in my progress. I kept a journal where I wrote about my day in English. At first, it was challenging, but I soon noticed my sentences getting longer and more complex. Writing helped me organize my thoughts and improve my grammar. It was a fun and effective way to reinforce what I had learned. Learning English became less about studying and more about enjoying the process. It felt like a game, and each new word or phrase was a small victory. I began to see progress every day, and that motivated me to continue. I realized that with practice, anyone could learn English, and it didn't have to be as difficult as I once thought. Chapter 3: Expanding My Knowledge. As I continued practicing, I found that English was no longer a subject I studied, but a skill I was developing. My vocabulary was expanding, and I started to notice the beauty of the language. English wasn't just about grammar rules. It was about expressing ideas, emotions, and experiences. I began to explore different areas of the language. I started reading more complex materials like novels and academic articles. Although some words were new to me, I was able to understand the context from the surrounding sentences. I kept a dictionary nearby, but I didn't feel as lost as before. I could often guess the meaning of a word based on how it was used. This gave me confidence in my ability to comprehend English. Speaking with others in English also helped me understand different accents and dialects. It was fascinating to see how people from different parts of the world spoke the language. I found that even though English has many variations, the core principles remain the same. This made it easier for me to adapt to different speaking styles. I also began using English in more practical situations. I wrote emails, participated in online discussions, and even called customer service in English. These real-life experiences showed me how English is used in everyday contexts. It was no longer just a classroom subject. It was a tool for communication in the real world. At this point, I felt comfortable using English in most situations. I could express myself clearly, even if I didn't know every word. I realized that learning English wasn't about memorizing endless rules, but about developing the ability to communicate. With practice and patience, I was able to make English a natural part of my life. Chapter 4: Overcoming Challenges. There were times when I felt frustrated. Some days it seemed like I wasn't improving as quickly as I wanted. I doubted myself and wondered if I was doing enough. But then I reminded myself of how far I had come. I realized that setbacks are a natural part of the learning process. They weren't signs of failure, but opportunities to grow. I focused on my weaknesses and worked to improve them. I knew that I had to keep pushing forward, even when it seemed hard. I practiced speaking with a focus on fluency rather than perfection. I also paid more attention to grammar and sentence structure. Although it was challenging, I understood that every mistake was a step closer to improvement. Sometimes it felt like I would never be fluent, but then I would think back to my first days of learning English. I had come so far since then. I had learned to love the language, and I was determined to keep improving. I realized that fluency wasn't an overnight achievement. It was a continuous journey. I began to take more risks in my speaking. Instead of worrying about making mistakes, I focused on expressing myself. I found that the more I practiced, the more natural my speaking became. I also started to speak with a variety of people from different backgrounds, which improved my listening and speaking skills. Eventually, I reached a point where I felt confident using English in almost any situation. I could understand movies without subtitles, have conversations with native speakers, and read books with ease. Learning English had become second nature. I realized that the hardest part was starting, and once I did, everything else followed naturally. Chapter 5: the power of consistency. Now, looking back, I can say that learning English was one of the best decisions I ever made. It was not easy, but it was worth every bit of effort. The key to success was consistency. I didn't try to learn everything at once. Instead, I took small steps every day, and over time, those steps added up. I learned that it's important to enjoy the process and celebrate the small victories. Every new word learned, every sentence spoken was an achievement. It wasn't about reaching a perfect level of fluency. It was about making progress each day. The more I practiced, the more confident I became. Through this journey, I also discovered the importance of perseverance. There were times when I wanted to give up, but I kept going. I realized that learning a language is not about avoiding mistakes, but about embracing them as part of the learning process. The more mistakes I made, the more I learned. Today, I can say that English is no longer a challenge for me. It's a language that I use every day, and it has opened up many opportunities in my life. I have friends from different parts of the world, and I can travel without worrying about the language barrier. Learning English has changed my life in ways I never expected. If you're thinking about learning English, don't hesitate. It's not as difficult as it may seem. With patience, persistence, and practice, you will see progress. Remember, the key is to keep learning and enjoying the process. You'll find that learning English is not only possible, but also easy when you make it part of your daily life. Chapter 6: The Joy of Reading. Reading became one of my favorite activities as my English improved. I started with short stories and gradually moved to novels. Each book was an adventure, not only because of the plot, but because of the new words and expressions I learned. I began to appreciate the rhythm and flow of the language. Every time I finished a book, I felt proud of how much I had understood. What helped me the most was reading aloud. This allowed me to practice pronunciation while also reinforcing what I had learned. Sometimes I would read a sentence several times, making sure I understood every word and how it was used. As I read more, I started to recognize patterns in sentence structure and vocabulary, which helped me speak more naturally. I also joined an online book club where people discuss books in English. It was a great way to practice writing and speaking. I could share my thoughts on the books I read, and hearing others' opinions helped me understand different perspectives. This was another way to immerse myself in the language and enjoy the learning process. Eventually, I began reading more complex genres like science fiction and historical novels. These books challenged me, but I loved the feeling of accomplishment when I finished them. Not only was I improving my English, but I was also expanding my knowledge of the world. Reading in English opened new doors to understanding different cultures and ideas. Looking back, I realize how much reading has contributed to my progress. It didn't just improve my vocabulary, it also improved my ability to think critically in English. I now know that the more I read, the more I grow as a learner. English is no longer just a language to study, but a tool that enriches my life. Chapter 7: Embracing Mistakes. At first, I was afraid of making mistakes in English. I wanted to speak perfectly, and I would often hesitate when I wasn't sure about a word or grammar rule. But over time, I learned that mistakes are an essential part of learning. They aren't failures, they're opportunities to learn and improve. One day, I was speaking with a native speaker, and I made several mistakes. I expected them to laugh at me, but instead, they kindly corrected me and praised my effort. That was a turning point for me. I realized that mistakes didn't make me less capable. They showed that I was trying and growing. I started to embrace my mistakes and use them as learning tools. Whenever I made an error, I would look up the correct way to say or write something, and I would make a note of it. This helped me remember and avoid the same mistake in the future. It became clear that each mistake brought me one step closer to fluency. I also realized that perfection wasn't the goal. The goal was to communicate. As long as I could get my message across, I was successful. I began to speak more freely, without worrying about every little mistake. This made my conversations more relaxed and enjoyable. Now, I see mistakes as a natural part of the learning process. They help me grow and refine my skills. I've learned that being afraid of making mistakes only holds me back. The more I make, the more I learn, and that's how I continue to improve. Chapter 8: The Power of Listening. Listening was one of the most important skills I focused on during my English journey. At first, I had difficulty understanding native speakers because they spoke so quickly and the words often blended together. But I knew that listening was key to improving my language skills, so I dedicated time each day to practice. I started by listening to podcasts and audiobooks in English. These resources allowed me to hear different accents and speaking styles. At first, I didn't understand everything, but I kept going. I would listen to the same audio multiple times, trying to catch new words or phrases each time. Slowly, my listening skills improved. Another useful method was watching movies and TV shows in English without subtitles. It was challenging, but it pushed me to understand more without relying on translations. Whenever I didn't understand something, I would rewind and listen again. This method helped me become more attuned to the natural flow of the language. Listening also helped me improve my speaking. As I became more familiar with how native speakers phrase things, I started to incorporate those patterns into my own speech. I would mimic the intonation and rhythm of what I heard. This made my speaking sound more natural and fluid. Over time, I became more confident in my ability to understand spoken English. Listening opened up a whole new world for me, from understanding songs to following fast-paced conversations. I realized that listening is not just about hearing words, but about connecting with the meaning behind them. Chapter 9: Learning from Others. One of the most rewarding parts of learning English was the connections I made with other people. I joined online language exchange groups and met people from all over the world. They were all at different levels, but we all shared the same goal: to learn and improve our English. By interacting with others, I was able to practice speaking, listening, and writing in real-world situations. I learned from their experiences and mistakes. Sometimes they would ask me questions or give me feedback, which helped me see my progress. Other times, I would offer tips based on my own journey. Through these exchanges, I discovered that everyone learns at their own pace, and there's no perfect way to learn a language. What works for one person may not work for another. I learned to embrace different learning styles and to be open to new approaches. This flexibility made my own learning process more enjoyable. I also found that teaching others was an excellent way to reinforce my own knowledge. When I help someone with a particular grammar rule or pronunciation tip, I would explain it in my own words. This solidified my understanding of the topic and gave me more confidence in my abilities. Learning from others taught me that language is a shared experience. We all have something valuable to offer, whether it's a new perspective or a useful learning method. This community of learners became an important part of my journey, and I'm grateful for the support and knowledge we exchanged. Chapter 10: A New Beginning. After months of consistent practice, I can proudly say that I've reached a high level of proficiency in English. Looking back at where I started, I can hardly believe how far I've come. I no longer hesitate when speaking, and I understand almost everything I hear. But this isn't the end of my journey. It's just a new beginning. Now, I have the ability to learn even more languages, and I feel confident that I can continue to grow in English. My future is full of possibilities, from traveling to new places to opening up career opportunities. English has become a powerful tool in my life, and it has allowed me to connect with people from different cultures. I realize that the most important lesson in this journey is that learning is a lifelong process. There will always be new words to learn, new phrases to understand, and new cultures to explore. The key is to keep learning, to keep practicing, and to keep enjoying the process. If you're just starting your journey, don't be discouraged by the challenges. Learning a language takes time and effort, but the rewards are worth it. If I can do it, so can you. Just remember to stay consistent. Embrace your mistakes and never stop learning. In the end, I've learned that learning English isn't difficult at all. It's about taking small steps every day and making the language a part of your life. As long as you stay motivated, you'll be amazed at what you can achieve. Chapter 11: The Challenge of Writing. As my English skills grew, I realized that writing was another area where I could improve. At first, I struggled with grammar, punctuation, and structure. Writing in English felt like a big challenge because I had to focus on so many details at once. However, I was determined to overcome this obstacle. To improve my writing, I started by writing short essays on different topics. I didn't worry too much about making mistakes. Instead, I focused on getting my ideas down. Then, I would review my work and look for errors. I would check my grammar, vocabulary, and sentence structure, and I would correct anything that didn't sound right. I also began to read more articles, blogs, and essays in English. This helped me understand different writing styles. I noticed how skilled writers organized their thoughts and used advanced vocabulary. I started applying some of these techniques to my own writing. The more I practiced, the more confident I became in my writing abilities. To challenge myself further, I joined an online writing group. There, I could share my essays and receive feedback from others. I learned that feedback was invaluable. It helped me see my mistakes and areas for improvement. Over time, I began to write more fluently and with better clarity. Writing became a way for me to express my thoughts more clearly in English. It was no longer just about improving grammar. It was about developing my own voice in the language. Writing in English had its challenges, but with practice and persistence, I became much more confident in my ability to communicate in writing. Chapter 12: The World of Podcasts. Podcasts became one of my favorite resources for learning English. I found that they were a fun and effective way to improve my listening skills. There were podcasts on almost every topic imaginable, from science and history to personal development and entertainment. I could listen to them during my daily commute or while doing chores around the house. The beauty of podcasts is that they provide real, conversational English. It was like having a conversation with someone without actually speaking. At first, it was hard to catch every word, but as I listened to more episodes, I began to understand more. I learned to pick out the key points and focus on the main ideas. I also enjoyed the variety of accents I encountered. By listening to different speakers, I trained my ear to understand a wider range of pronunciations. This made me more adaptable when listening to native speakers. Over time, I even started to recognize regional expressions and colloquialisms, which made me feel more connected to the language. To improve my comprehension, I started taking notes while listening to podcasts. Afterward, I would review the notes and look up words I didn't know. This helped me retain new vocabulary and reinforce the language patterns I was hearing. I also began to repeat sentences and phrases I heard on the podcasts, practicing my pronunciation and fluency. Podcasts became a key part of my daily routine. Not only did they help me improve my English, but they also kept me informed and entertained. I realized that learning English doesn't have to be boring or tedious. It can be fun and enjoyable if you find the right resources. Chapter 13: Overcoming Self-Doubt. Even though I had made significant progress, there were still times when I doubted myself. Sometimes I would have a conversation in English, and I would worry that I wasn't speaking correctly or that I wasn't using the right words. I feared that others would judge me for my mistakes. But over time, I learned to embrace these feelings of self-doubt. I realized that everyone experiences them at some point in their learning journey. I wasn't the only one who made mistakes, and no one expected me to be perfect. The most important thing was to keep speaking and keep practicing, even if I made errors. I also learned that the more I used English in real-life situations, the less I worried about my mistakes. For example, when I traveled to an English-speaking country, I spoke with locals at cafes, shops, and tourist attractions. They were always patient and encouraging, which helped me feel more comfortable using English. Sometimes, I would review my progress by looking back at old recordings of myself speaking. Hearing how much my pronunciation and fluency had improved made me feel proud of my accomplishments. It reminded me that progress takes time and it's okay to have doubts along the way. Ultimately, I came to understand that self-doubt is a natural part of the learning process. It doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're challenging yourself to grow. The key is to keep going, even when you don't feel confident. With practice, confidence follows naturally. Chapter 14, Real-World Experiences. As my English improved, I began to seek out more opportunities to use the language in real-world situations. I traveled to English-speaking countries where I could immerse myself in the language. Speaking English every day in different contexts helped me build confidence and improve my conversational skills. I remember my first trip to London. I had the chance to meet people from all over the world, and I was amazed at how easy it was to connect with others through the language. I visited museums, toured landmarks, and chatted with locals, and I realized that English had opened up a world of new experiences for me. In addition to travel, I also found opportunities to use English in my professional life. I started collaborating with international colleagues and clients, which required me to communicate effectively in English. This real-world application of the language helped me see the practical value of what I had learned. One of the most rewarding experiences was participating in an international conference. I gave a presentation in English to an audience from different countries. The experience was nerve-wracking, but it showed me how far I had come. I was able to express my ideas clearly and confidently, and I received positive feedback. These real-world experiences helped me realize that learning English was more than just a personal goal. It was a tool that could open up countless opportunities. Whether in travel, work, or personal connections, English has allowed me to connect with the world in a way that would not have been possible without it. Chapter 15, Continuing the Journey. Now, as I reflect on my journey, I realize that learning English is not something that ends. Language learning is a continuous process. Even though I have reached a high level of proficiency, I know that there is always more to learn and explore. The beauty of learning a language is that it evolves, and there's always something new to discover. I continue to challenge myself by learning new words, improving my pronunciation, and expanding my vocabulary. I also try to stay up to date with modern slang and expressions so that I can stay connected to the evolving language. Every day presents an opportunity to grow and become more fluent. Moreover, I have realized that learning English is not just about acquiring a skill. It's about broadening my perspective and connecting with people from all walks of life. English has become a bridge to understanding different cultures, ideas, and experiences. It has opened doors for me that I never imagined. I also recognize that I can give back by helping others who are learning English. Sharing what I've learned with beginners and offering support to fellow learners feels incredibly rewarding. Teaching others has also helped reinforce my own knowledge and keeps me motivated to continue learning. As I continue my journey with English, I know that the road is long, but it's full of endless possibilities. No matter how far I've come, I'll never stop learning because I've discovered that the more I learn, the more doors open in my life. And for that reason, I can truly say that learning English is one of the most valuable things I've ever done.